A Heart's Journey Through Time by Nathaniel Bishop. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Boston as Elizabeth Winters hurried through the bustling marketplace. Her modest blue muslin dress swished around her ankles, and she clutched her weathered leather satchel close, mindful of the precious medical supplies within. At 22, she had already earned a reputation as one of the city's most skilled herbalists, though many disapproved of a woman practicing such a trade. The year was 1842, and while Boston prided itself on being among America's most progressive cities, there were still boundaries that proper young ladies weren't meant to cross. Elizabeth had crossed nearly all of them. "Miss Winters," a deep voice called out behind her, causing her to pause mid-stride. She knew that voice, Dr. James Crawford, the newly arrived physician who had taken over old Dr. Miller's practice 3 months ago. Elizabeth turned, lifting her chin slightly as she met his gaze. "Dr. Crawford." She offered a small curtsy, more out of habit than deference. "I trust you found the feverfew tincture effective for Mrs. Patterson's headaches?" James Crawford stood before her, his tall frame casting a shadow in the late afternoon light. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from the day's work, and his green eyes held a mixture of professional respect and something else, something that made Elizabeth's heart beat just a little faster. "Remarkably effective," he admitted, adjusting his leather medical bag. "Though I confess I'm curious about your methods. Perhaps we might discuss them over tea sometime." Elizabeth felt her cheeks warm, though she maintained her composure. "Dr. Crawford, are you suggesting an unchaperoned meeting between us?" A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I'm suggesting a professional consultation between colleagues, Miss Winters. Though if you require a chaperone, I'm sure my housekeeper would be happy to serve tea." Before Elizabeth could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the harbor. Shouts and screams filled the air as people began running toward them. "Fire!" came the cry. "Fire at the Peterson warehouse." Without hesitation, both Elizabeth and James rushed toward the chaos. The warehouse district was home to many poor families who lived in the neighboring tenements, and Elizabeth knew there would be injuries. As they approached, thick black smoke billowed into the sky. James grabbed Elizabeth's arm, pulling her to a stop. "It's too dangerous," he insisted. Elizabeth jerked free. "There are children living in those buildings, Dr. Crawford. You can either help me or stand aside." Something shifted in his expression, respect, admiration, and concern warring across his features. "Then we go together." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Elizabeth and James worked side by side, treating burns, smoke inhalation, and various injuries. Her knowledge of herbal remedies complemented his medical training perfectly, and together they saved many from serious harm. It was well past midnight when the last patient had been tended to. Elizabeth sat on a wooden crate, exhausted, her dress smudged with soot and her hair falling from its usually neat arrangement. James approached, offering a cup of water. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "I've never met anyone quite like you, Miss Winters." Elizabeth took a sip of water, too tired to maintain proper decorum. "I suppose that's not entirely a compliment, coming from a proper physician." "On the contrary." James turned to face her fully. "I've studied at the finest medical schools in Boston and Philadelphia, yet today I learned more about practical healing from watching you work than I have from any textbook. Your understanding of herbal remedies, your instincts with patients, it's extraordinary. Yet many of your colleagues consider my methods little better than witchcraft." Elizabeth replied, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Then they are fools." James's voice was firm. "Medicine shouldn't be bound by prejudice or tradition for tradition's sake. It should be about healing, about finding what works best for each patient." Elizabeth studied him carefully. "You're different from other physicians I've met, Dr. Crawford." "James," he corrected gently. "After today I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" A small smile tugged at Elizabeth's lips. "Elizabeth, then." In the weeks that followed, James became a frequent visitor to Elizabeth's small shop. Their professional consultations gradually evolved into longer conversations about medicine, society, and their hopes for the future. Despite the gossip it generated, James seemed unconcerned about being seen with the herb woman. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the shop windows, James arrived with an unusual request. "I'd like you to teach me about your remedies," he said without preamble. Elizabeth looked up from the herbs she was grinding. "Pardon?" "I want to learn everything you know about herbal medicine, and in exchange, I'll teach you about modern medical techniques." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervous energy. We could help so many more people if we combined our knowledge. Elizabeth set down her mortar and pestle. The medical establishment would never accept such a partnership. Then we'll change the establishment. James stepped closer, his expression earnest. Elizabeth, we've proven how effective we can be working together. Think of what we could accomplish if we formally combined our practices. You're talking about more than just a professional partnership, aren't you? Elizabeth's voice was barely above a whisper. James reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. I'm talking about everything. A partnership in healing, in life, in love. I know it won't be easy. We'll face opposition from both traditional doctors and society at large. But I don't care about any of that. I care about you, your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, your unwavering dedication to helping others. Elizabeth's heart raced. James, do you understand what you're risking? Your reputation, your practice. Some things are worth risking everything for. He lifted her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. I love you, Elizabeth Winters. Will you marry me? Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes as she looked at this man who had defied convention and prejudice to stand beside her. Yes, she whispered. Yes to everything. Their wedding was small but joyful, held in the garden where Elizabeth grew her medicinal herbs. Mrs. Patterson, whose headaches had first brought them together, served as witness alongside James's housekeeper. In the years that followed, James and Elizabeth Crawford became known throughout Boston as pioneers in combining traditional and modern medicine. They opened a clinic that served both wealthy and poor patients, teaching a new generation of healers that there was value in both ancient wisdom and modern science. Their greatest triumph came 5 years after their marriage, when Harvard Medical School invited Elizabeth to give a lecture on herbal medicine, the first woman ever to do so. As she stood at the podium, James watching proudly from the front row, Elizabeth reflected on how far they had come. They had achieved something remarkable not just in medicine but in love. They had proven that the strongest partnerships were built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the courage to defy society's expectations. As Elizabeth finished her lecture to thunderous applause, she caught James's eye. He was beaming at her with the same admiration and love she'd seen that first day in the marketplace. They had changed their world, not through grand gestures or loud protests, but through quiet dedication to their beliefs and to each other. Their love story became a symbol of hope for others who dared to challenge convention. It proved that true love wasn't just about passion or romance, it was about finding someone who believed in your dreams as much as their own, who would stand beside you in the face of opposition, and who would work with you to build something greater than either of you could achieve alone. Years later, when asked about the secret to their success, Elizabeth would always smile and say, "Love isn't just about following your heart, it's about finding someone whose heart beats in harmony with your own, whose dreams align with yours, and whose strength complements your weaknesses." James and I didn't just fall in love. We chose to build a life that reflected our shared values and aspirations. And James would add, with a gentle squeeze of her hand, the greatest adventures in life come not from following the well-worn path, but from having the courage to forge your own, especially when you find someone willing to walk that path beside you. Their story remained a testament to the power of love to transcend social boundaries and create lasting change. In a time when women were expected to be decorative and docile, Elizabeth and James Crawford proved that the strongest marriages were those built on equality, respect, and shared purpose. They had done more than find love, they had created a legacy that would inspire generations to come, proving that when hearts and minds work in harmony, anything is possible.